Now, joining us for a discussion on Ukraine's recovery and mineral promise, pathways amid conflict, please welcome Deputy Minister, Ministry of Economy, Environment and Agriculture of Ukraine, the Honourable Yegor Perelygin, Associate General Counsel at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, Jonathan Taylor, and Board Member at BGV, Sergii Voitsekhovskyi. Moderated by Senior Managing Director at McLarty Associates, Ambassador Geoff Pyatt.
Good morning. Thank you very much to everybody for being here. Well, I'm thrilled to be able to moderate this session and want to start with a huge thank you to Abigail, Avery, Erasto, the team at SAFE for putting this spotlight on Ukraine in the context of this year's SAFE Summit. I'm not sure it's well understood outside the circle of us who focus every single day on Ukraine's defense of its territory, how important Ukraine already is and the potential contribution that it can make across the critical minerals spectrum. It's a country that has a significant geology, a strong workforce with a very strong social license for mining and processing, tremendous potential for brownfield projects to help scale up supply chains for the energy minerals that we need to defend our own energy security, and finally, the support of the U.S. government and the Trump administration through the Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. So I'm really thrilled to be able to lead this conversation this morning and looking forward to hearing from all of our panelists. I want to start with a dear friend, Minister Yegor Perelygin. I've said that in my travels when I was Assistant Secretary, there was no mining minister I worked with who was deeper into the subject than Yegor. So Minister, if you can kick us off, talk a little bit about how Ukraine helps to solve for the problem of diversification and growth of critical mineral supply chains.
Ambassador, thank you. Colleagues and friends, thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you to SAFE for organizing this and inviting us. Listen, it's very simple. I believe that the problem and the predicament that we have at hand actually can be solved because of Ukrainian history. Not many know that Ukraine was actually one of the leading countries in the Soviet Union that actually pioneered some of the key hydrometallurgical processes and some of the key developmental processes of what is known today as critical minerals. Now, Ukraine was home to a very advanced series of hydrometallurgy in zirconium extraction and then moving on to hafnium extraction. Ukraine used to extract scandium. Ukraine had a fully fledgling titanium industry that actually produced titanium sponge and titanium ingots. And until 2021, Ukraine was actually an exporter of titanium sponge. Not many people realize that. The only country in Europe to actually be able to do that. So considering that, for example, if you take titanium industry, it's a core industry that can bring in a lot of the positions and mineral positions and metal positions, for example, of what we call rare metals today. So basically, you have the byproducts like the zirconium, the hafnium cycle. You have the capability to do germanium, especially if you're doing, polycrystallic, monocrystallic lenses. All of that existed in Ukraine, and we do not need to invent the bicycle today. What is key, in my opinion, is not focusing only on the upstream problem. By going upstream, we are going to be, facing the problem of high OPEX costs and the difficulty to compete with economies of scale from, one country that we all understand that can, crush many of the other economies. So basically, the logic is do not invent the bicycle, use what Ukraine had, develop and focus. So basically focus on the midstream, where the biggest problems are right now globally, and basically focus on the key upstream positions that actually exist in Ukraine in abundance. For example, #1 country in titanium ore reserves, in Europe. Sorry, not globally, in Europe, #1 country in Europe in terms of graphite reserves. So basically, you can go uranium, you can choose uranium, which is also Ukraine would be #1 country in Europe in terms of uranium extraction. So focus on that, focus on the basics, and get the midstream right. That's what we are after.
Great, thank you, Minister. So, Jonathan, one of the other distinguishing aspects of the Ukraine critical minerals issue is the extremely strong support that this sector has received from the U.S. government over multiple presidential administrations. And now this is institutionalized in the U.S.-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. Everybody in the world knows about the U.S.-Ukraine critical minerals deal. Obviously, Secretary Bessent, your boss, Ben Black, have played leading roles in making this successful. But for everybody in this room, the godfather of the U.S.-Ukraine Critical Mineral or Reconstruction Investment Fund is sitting here with us. So, Jonathan, walk us through, where are we with the fund? What does industry need to know? And show me the money.
Yes. Well, thank you, Ambassador, first of all. That's very kind words. So we are almost exactly a year from the signing of the critical minerals deal, which was, as you said, a historic event. And I'm very proud to have played a role in getting the United States and Ukraine to this point. The critical minerals deal, really what it did was create a binational, first of its kind, private equity investment fund with the U.S. and Ukraine together jointly working to create a fund that invests into Ukraine's recovery. Now, what's unique about this fund, other than the fact that the only two limited partners are two governments, is that, one, the source of capital, the primary source of capital is going to be revenues from Ukraine's hydrocarbons and mining sector. Essentially, half of the money that would otherwise go directly into the budget is going to flow into the fund and then going to be reinvested in Ukraine's recovery and its economy, which is a sort of unique concept that came to us from the presidents of Ukraine and the United States through the Secretary of Treasury. And then that was sort of thing we had to work into the concept of the fund. And then obviously we knew we didn't want to wait until those revenues flowed in to start investing. So then we'd put seed capital into the fund. Currently there's $150 million of seed capital that we are investing now. And that's already we're already putting money to work. As many of you might have saw, just a few weeks ago, we announced our first investment in the fund, which frankly, I'm extremely proud of the speed we put it to work. It's less than a year. We went from concept, words on a page, to standing up a fund, operationalizing it, creating an investment strategy, coming up with investment pipeline, and then investing in the fund. So it was Sign Engineering, which is obviously a tech company. It's not a mining company, but the fund strategy is looking at infrastructure more broadly, and technology is coming out of essentially out of the conflict in dual-use technologies. But mining is a huge part of the story. It's going to stay a part of the investment strategy of the fund. There's also, parts of the fund that are not part of the investment strategy but are built in, such as our offtake rights, which a lot of people don't know about. But the United States negotiated for the specific offtake ability to participate in the offtake of Ukrainian mines outside of any investment the fund makes. We have this ability to participate at market rates for any Ukrainian mine offtake. Also, we negotiated for the fact that essentially now in Ukrainian law, there is a obligation not to sell to strategic competitors such as China and Russia. Not that they were going to sell to Russia anyway, but now there's that is baked into Ukrainian law, which we're very proud of. And there's this additional obligation that we have to look at it, putting capital to work in the mining sector, and we're very, very actively doing that, finding the right projects, trying to put our capital to work to make, we do believe that Ukraine can be a critical minerals powerhouse in the near to medium term, and we're working to de-risk capital to invest in the sector and to help secure America's supply chains to the United States, our allies in the West, and bring Ukrainian minerals westward into our other allies around the world.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. And finally, turning to the private sector, Sergei, you work for a big consolidated industrial group which spans the spectrum from critical minerals to consumer retail to construction. Talk a little bit about what it's like to do business in wartime Ukraine, but also talk about where you see the opportunities, complementing what the minister and Jonathan talked about, to move the needle quickly in terms of delivering additional volumes of the materials that the world needs to advance our energy and defense security.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this question and having me here actually to be a representative of Ukrainian private business for nowadays in Washington. It's very good and very appreciate that. Of course, that a couple of words about our company. We are doing our business focus on investment into critical mining sector. We have around 6 different projects in critical mining. This graphite, beryllium, rare earth elements, zircon, titanium, and molybdenum. And of course that we have 5 different sectors of presence in Ukraine. As you mentioned, grocery with 3-4 million clients per day. That's why, to be honest, the situation that we have now in the country and the understanding of the situation among our partners, especially in other countries, is quite different, because Ukraine is a big country, and of course that we have a war. But the majority of territory is quite safe to do business and actually to invest, to develop projects, especially in critical mining. By the way, all our projects, they are in a quite safe zones in the central part of the country, in western part of the country, and it's important to understand. The second thing that let me tell you the story more than only about our company, because Ukraine is a reliable partner for United States in a value chain of critical mining supply. Because as Yegor Perelygin mentioned, that Ukraine is a well-known mining country from the past, and now we have the opportunity to make industrialization to zero with a critical focus on the critical mining sector, and we can supply United States with more than 30 different critical elements from the list of 60 in general.
Great, and I remember from my time as ambassador, Chemours is already a significant off-taker of titanium from Ukraine, for instance. Sergei, if I can ask one follow-up to you and also to the other panelists. I was really glad this morning to hear Chair Young Kim and Anami Bera reaffirming their strong commitment to the Dominance Act and sort of really building a bipartisan consensus around our economic statecraft toolkit in this area. I think Quill was here also. Obviously, you're looking for support from the government, from your own government, but also from the U.S. government and international partners. What do you need in that regard? And then, Minister, if I can ask you the flip side of that, I won't ask you what you need from your own government, but what are you looking for from the United States and our other international partners? Let's start with Sergei.
Usually, to develop critical mining projects, we need 3 main things. First of all, this is funding, because all these projects, they are quite costly, and for example, in our graphite mining, to establish all the necessary infrastructure, we need close to $400 million of capex investment. Usually, it's quite complicated to make this investment only based on our own sources. That's why we need to integration into international value chain. And actually, the idea was Ukrainian Reconstruction Investment Fund and the cooperation together with American government. It's a very great idea. And we have completed actually a great work for 1 year. This is from, I know usually we have observation that bureaucracy and different things that we can do from the governmental side, it takes a lot of time, but in case of Ukrainian Reconstruction Investment Fund, we know that from the inside, not inside the fund, but from inside of a private business, that this is quite a great work. The second thing that we need integration into international value chain, because this is a competition not of companies, but competition of countries. And it's important to be, let's say, in the modern value chain of United States, of European Union, with your critical materials. It's quite important. And we have, let's say, the observation that this cooperation between the governments and with DFC will help to give this access to the market with our products. And of course, that the third thing that usually we need technologies, because you know that, for example, based on our graphite project, 97% of graphite, of spherical pure graphite, delivered from China. It means that all the technologies they concentrated in this country, and but for our company, it's important to work with American and with European technologies.
Great. Minister, from your side.
Well, from our side, it's very simple. Well, We believe that first move de-risking is basically a priority number one, and this is where we want to see first loss equity investments and movements being made. This is very important because the market and the private capital follows you if you can get the pioneering, the market-making movement, so to say, at the beginning. Second, I would say it's the government-backed offtakes, and this is, I believe, that the United States have played a very, very significant role globally just in the last couple of years, and we have seen some good deals, we have seen some good support in that regard. And number three, I would say, is basically, the margin protection mechanisms that exist. They are many and varied. The problem is, why am I talking about margin protection mechanisms? We don't want to end up in a situation, I guess no European country wants to end up in a situation, or no American player wants to end up in a situation when you will have basically a Northvolt Swedish bankruptcy that has basically suffocated one of the darlings of the lithium-ion battery making industry of the last 10 years, and basically, it was a big problem for everybody. So I guess what is very, very important is the fact that, price floors and these kind of mechanisms, they can help the risk, and they can also help stop the benchmarking of some of the key projects that we are trying to push against China. What do I mean by that? Very simple. When we look at the business models proposed, when we're looking at the investment models being proposed, if we benchmark them directly against economies of scale, for example, from the Chinese territory, we will understand that economically a lot of these projects will not be viable. But we cannot only look at it in this way. We combine the mechanisms of support from government-backed financial instruments, and then we can basically see that if we do that, we price in the risk or the problematic expectation that something will go wrong for 3, 4, 5, 6 months of potential supply disruption. And once you factor that in, once you factor in the financial instruments, once you factor in the risk, suddenly your project becomes interesting because you're looking at it in a more complex kind of way. And this is, I guess, something that we want to see more being used from our partners.
Great. And let's move into the lightning round. Speaking of partners, I was in Europe last week. It was really striking to see the continued convergence between the U.S. and Europe on the importance of de-risking these critical mineral supply chains. Obviously delighted to see the agreement that Commissioner Šefčovič and Secretary Rubio signed last week on critical minerals cooperation. Jonathan, if you can lead us off, how are we doing on working on this Ukraine opportunity set as a transatlantic project? And then same thing for Minister as well.
Yeah, I think this is really, just speaking personally, it's an excellent example of transatlantic cooperation because we work together. I talk to Yegor literally every day. The U.S. and Ukrainian, governments are working closely together, but we're also bringing together the business communities in a way that I find very inspiring. And I think that we are seeing the opportunities opening up for, developing secure supply chain, having Ukraine as a reliable partner for secure supply chains, and the ability to kind of leverage that to bring critical minerals to the U.S. and our allies is really very high.
As Ukraine moves towards membership in the European Union.
I think, I guess, necessity is the mother of invention. So when the war started, we started looking at, at basically learning how to prioritize very fast. And I guess as we were building up this transatlantic relationship and, taking it up to a higher level, we realized that we cannot, first of all, we do not need to invent the bicycle. And second of all, we cannot basically cover everything. The scope is way too large. So we learned to prioritize. And we believe that basically by doing this fast, time is your most valuable currency, and basically learning how to prioritize and choosing the 5, 6 key areas that we want to go after in the critical mineral scene, that allowed us to basically kind of show the way to the European continent as well, that, we can do this in under a year, and we can get some of these projects, moved. And as the ambassador, you have really, really rightfully, noticed, Ukrainian titanium ores are very well known in the States, for example. So, a lot of these products would not be a surprise for some of the big end users on the American continent.
Good. Continuing with our lightning round, help me take on the skeptics. People watch CNN, they see there's a war on. Putin would have us believe that Russian victory is inevitable, although he's obviously bogged down today on the battlefield. What would you point to as the most compelling evidence that that argument is wrong, and that in fact Ukraine is already filling gaps, is already demonstrating an ability to innovate, and has the potential to scale that in a significant market-moving kind of way? Maybe start, Minister, and then Sergei from your side.
Well, I guess one of the good examples is, for example, titanium ores are still flowing to the United States. Perhaps not in the same volumes that they used to be, but they're still going. That's one. Number two is Ukraine has a fully, very, very rapidly developing and growing dual-use and defense tech cycle, which uses and industries which uses a lot of these components, a lot of these materials. That's number two. And we have like more than 2,500 companies that actually actively operate and manufacture and are scaling up at the speed of light. I've seen some incredible things in Ukraine being done. And number three, I guess, the point is that, look, Ukraine is deploying a lot of these instruments. Ukraine has started deploying, when we were, at one point we realized that there is no point in waiting, for example, for war risk insurance to come Ukraine by itself. So we went out and actually did our local governmental war risk insurance scheme for frontline regions. We realized that some of the clustering approaches and industrial park approaches that we're taking on and were developed well in the West, we can use them in Ukraine. So we started deploying the industrial park scheme in Ukraine, which basically allows you to cover some of your capex expenses and allows you to, for example, benefit from some of the import, subsidies that we can give on your equipment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we've done all of this in the more than 4 years of war. So basically, we've done more reforms and more movement towards business than we have done during the time before the war.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the counter-drone technology sector, where now the world is beating a path to Ukraine's door. And I think, especially given the synergy between batteries, battery materials, and the innovation that you're seeing on the Ukrainian battlefield, there's an obvious vertical integration there. Sergei, 10-second example.
Actually, the best example is to show something, because now we completed the battery in Ukraine with 100% of our anode material of graphite from Ukraine, from our mine. And this is the best example that we can make a value in Ukraine in all these situations that now we appear, actually. The second important thing that this is a great opportunity for all our partners from U.S. To participate in industrialization to zero in Ukraine. It means that we will create, not only rebuild the country, let's say, then make the new industrial patents for Ukrainians, but actually this is a completion of a value chain and necessary thing that is quite valuable for United States.
Good.
And
last round, starting with Jonathan. If there's an industry executive who's listened to you today, what is the one most important step that you would ask them to take next? And start with Jonathan.
Yeah, I'll say, so just building on the prior comments, I've been to Ukraine 3 times in the past 6 months, and the technological innovation I've seen is really quite astounding. And it's definitely mostly in the, right now there's a lot of it in the dual use space, but I think you'll see it in other sectors immediately. So as I say, go to Ukraine, see it for yourself, see it with your own eyes, because it's very impressive.
I'll say very simply, take the risk. Come to Ukraine, take the risk on the business. The upside is way too good.
Sergei.
Yeah, the best time, that this is a say. I would like to end to finish with by using the saying, and it's a very good saying that what was the best time to plant a tree? It was 30 years ago, and what is the best time for now? It is today. Yeah, actually, that's why to participate in this creation today, this is a great opportunity for our partners.
Great. Well, thank you to all of our panelists. I think you can see why I'm so incredibly enthusiastic about the opportunities in Ukraine today, both in terms of our energy security interests, but also the national security case. So please join me in thanking all three of our. Thank you.